Revna had not planned on bringing the most feared king in the known world to his knees, but here she was, standing barefoot on volcanic stone in a throne room that smelled of sulfur and old power, with a stolen dragon egg hidden beneath her cloak, and the Dragon King of Sindrath was kneeling. Not bowing. Kneeling. There was a difference. Bowing was politics. Kneeling was surrender. And it made every armored warrior in the chamber reach for their weapons and stare at her like she had just set the sky on fire. She had not set the sky on fire. She wanted to make that very clear. She was a wolf shifter with no pack, no title, no coin, and exactly one stolen possession strapped against her ribs beneath 3 layers of wool. She was not the kind of person who made kings kneel. She was the kind of person who got stepped on in crowded marketplaces. And yet, King Casimir of Sindrath, sovereign of the Ember Throne, the man whose name alone had ended 2 territorial wars and started a third, was on one knee, with his head bowed, and his hands pressed flat against the stone floor. The fire that burned in twin iron braziers on either side of his throne had gone out the moment he dropped. Not dimmed, not flickered. Gone, as if the flames themselves had knelt with him. She counted 14 guards, 8 advisors, 3 servants frozen mid-step, 1 enormous hound sleeping in the corner, unbothered by everything, which she respected. Every other living creature in the room was staring at her with expressions ranging from bewildered horror to murder. The egg was the problem. She could feel it humming against her ribs, warm and steady, a vibration that lived somewhere between sound and feeling. It had been quiet for the entire journey, days of nothing. She had almost convinced herself it was dead. Just a pretty stone she had been hauling across a mountain range for no reason, like an absolute fool. But the moment she had been dragged into this throne room, the moment Casimir had risen from his seat to look at her, the egg had woken up. The hum had started low, barely there, and then it had built and built until she could feel it in her teeth, in her sternum, in the soles of her bare feet against the warm stone floor. Casimir had stopped mid-sentence. His head had tilted, the way a predator does when it catches a scent it cannot place. Then his eyes had found hers, and whatever he saw there, or felt from the egg, had driven him to the floor like a blow to the chest. She had been in his presence for less than 2 minutes. A guard to her left shifted his weight. Another across the chamber drew his blade halfway, the scrape of steel obscenely loud. A man near the throne, tall and severe with close-cropped silver hair, raised one hand without looking away from Casimir. The guard froze. "Nobody moves," the silver-haired man said. "Nobody speaks." Revna's legs were shaking. She wanted to run. She wanted to apologize. She wanted to explain that she had not meant to do whatever she had just done, that she was just a refugee, that she had no idea why the most powerful man she had ever stood before was on his knees in front of her, like she was sacred. Seconds crawled by, then a minute, then another. Casimir's hands curled slowly against the stone. His shoulders rose and fell with a single deep breath. And then he looked up. His eyes were molten gold, bright and burning, and they were wet. Revna's breath caught. She had expected rage. She had prepared herself for violence, for interrogation, for the cold ruthlessness that every story about the Dragon King promised. She had not prepared herself for this. He looked at her like she was the answer to a question he had stopped asking years ago. "Where?" he said, and his voice came out fractured, raw, nothing like the commanding tone that had been issuing orders when she was first dragged in. "Did you find that?" "I did not steal it," she whispered, which was a lie. She had absolutely stolen it, but it felt important to establish her innocence early, given the circumstances. Casimir rose to his feet. He was enormous, taller than Soren, and broader in a way that felt less like muscle and more like geology. He stepped toward her, and every guard tensed. "That egg," he said, his gaze fixed on the place where the hum radiated outward like a second heartbeat, "has been lost for 30 years. The silver-haired man by the throne went still. Casimir stopped barely an arm's length away, close enough that she could feel the heat rolling off his skin. Standing near him felt like standing next to a furnace, warmth that seeped into your bones and made you forget what cold felt like. He reached toward her, and Revna flinched. He stopped. His hand hung in the air between them, and he pulled back. "You will stay," he said. Not a request. Revna stared up at him, this towering stranger with burning eyes and tears drying on his cheeks, and felt the egg pulse against her heart like it was agreeing. She had come to Sindrath with nothing. No pack, no name worth speaking, no mate. Now a dragon king was telling her she could not leave, and a dead egg was singing against her chest, and she had no idea what any of it meant. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was never going back to Thornwall. 3 weeks earlier, the moon had made Revna a promise it had no intention of keeping. The seal appeared on the inside of her left wrist at midnight, blooming across her skin like ink dropped in water. She had been elbow-deep in a wash basin, scrubbing linens for the pack house, when the burning started. A sharp, bright heat that made her gasp and yank her arm free. She stared at the mark, a pale silver crescent, delicate and luminous, with a thread of light that pulsed in time with her heartbeat. Beneath it, so faint she had to bring her wrist to her face to read it, was a sigil. The Alpha's sigil. Soren. Her legs gave out. She sat down hard on the cold stone floor, suds dripping from her elbows, and tried to remember how to breathe. The moon seal was the most sacred bond in wolf culture, the moon's own declaration, written on the body, that two wolves were destined to belong to each other. The sigil beneath the crescent told you who. You could not fake it. You could not force it. It simply was. And the moon had chosen Revna, the packhouse orphan, the girl left on the steps as a newborn with no note and no name, for the Alpha King of Thornwall. Her first thought was joy. Pure, stupid, reckless joy that flooded her chest and made her eyes sting. Her second thought, arriving roughly 4 seconds later, was terror. Because Soren was the Alpha King. Beautiful and brutal and surrounded by women of noble blood who had been groomed since birth for the possibility of being his mate. Women with names and lineages and lands. Women like Vivica Ashford, whose family controlled half the Eastern Territories and who had been seen on Soren's arm at every formal gathering for the past year. And Revna was nobody. She washed linens. She had calluses from lye soap and a braid that was perpetually coming undone, and exactly one dress that did not have a mend in it somewhere. But the seal was there, silver and undeniable on her wrist. The moon did not make mistakes. She spent 3 days gathering the courage to show him. 3 days of pressing her sleeve down over the mark, of rehearsing what she would say. "Your Majesty, the moon has spoken." "No, too formal." "Soren, I have something to show you." "Too familiar." On the 4th night, she decided to stop being a coward. She would find him. She would show him the seal. And whatever happened next, at least the waiting would be over. The Alpha's private hall was in the East Wing, a place Revna had never been permitted to enter. She slipped past the outer guards during the shift change, her heart slamming against her ribs, and followed the sound of voices down a candlelit corridor. She heard Soren before she saw him. His voice carried, low and rich and amused. And then she heard the laugh. Revna stopped outside a half-open door. Through the gap, she could see firelight and the edge of a settee. Soren was sprawled across it, a goblet dangling from his fingers. And leaning into his side, her arm looped through his, was Vivica Ashford. "They are calling it a scandal," Vivica was saying. "The washhouse girl. Can you imagine?" Soren snorted. "The seal is a mistake. It happens. a malformed mark on a packless orphan with no bloodline. The moon would not insult me like that. And if she comes to you with it? Viveka asked. She was smiling, the kind of smile that had teeth in it. Then I will tell her exactly what it is, a defect, a blemish. Soren took a long drink from his goblet. The moon does not match kings with washerwomen. Viveka laughed, bright and cruel, and Soren laughed with her. Revna could not feel her legs. The silver crescent on her wrist burned like a brand, and for one terrible, stretched second, the entire world went silent. Then the pain arrived. Not physical. Deeper. The kind that starts in the center of your chest and radiates outward until it fills every part of you, until there is no room left for air or thought or hope. The kind that rewrites everything you believed about yourself in a single stroke. Of course he did not want her. Nobody had ever wanted her, not from the very first night she was left on those steps. Why would the most powerful man in the realm be any different? The moon seal throbbed on her wrist, mocking her with its silver glow, a promise etched into her skin by a moon that had apparently forgotten what she was. A foundling, a nothing, a girl whose own parents had not wanted her enough to leave a name. She backed away from the door without a sound. She walked on legs that did not feel like her own, out of the east wing, through the main hall, past the washroom where her linen still sat in cold, soapy water. She walked until she reached the northern edge of Thornwall's territory, where the forest gave way to black rock and the air turned sharp with sulfur. The borderlands. Beyond them lay Sindrath, the realm of dragons, where no wolf ventured and survived. That was where she found the egg. It sat in a hollow at the base of a dead oak, half buried in ash and dry leaves, as if someone had hidden it there and never come back. It was the size of 2 fists pressed together, dark as a bruise, veined with threads of deep copper that caught the moonlight. It was warm. Revna knelt and pressed her palm flat against the shell. The warmth seeped into her hand, up her arm, and settled behind her sternum like a coal that refused to go out. It felt alive. Not in the way a bird egg feels alive, with the fragile promise of hollow bones and wet feathers. This felt ancient, patient. Like it had been waiting in this hollow for a very long time, and it was not surprised to see her. She should have left it. She should have walked back to the pack house and gone on washing linens until she was old and gray and invisible. She picked up the egg instead. She wrapped it in her only good shawl, tucked it beneath her cloak, and crossed the border into dragon territory without looking back. Behind her, the moon seal on her wrist flickered once and went dark. They found her on the 3rd day. Revna had not made it far into Sindrath before her body started failing. She was a wolf in dragon country, and the land itself seemed to reject her. The air was too hot, too dry, too saturated with the mineral tang of volcanic soil. Her lungs burned, her skin cracked. The egg, nestled in the wrap against her body, was the only thing that felt right, its steady warmth a counterpoint to the hostile heat pressing in from all sides. She was half delirious when the patrol found her. 4 dragon soldiers in scaled armor riding mounts she had no name for. Not horses. Lower to the ground and faster, with clawed feet and whip-thin tails. One dismounted and hauled her upright. His grip was furnace hot through her sleeve. "Wolf," he said, like it was a diagnosis. "Guilty," Revna whispered, because her mouth apparently had its own survival instincts, and humor was the only weapon she had left. They bound her hands and threw her over the back of a mount. The ride to the capital took 2 days. She spent it draped over the animal's spine like a sack of meal, watching the landscape blur past in red rock and black sand. They gave her water but no food. The egg stayed quiet the entire time, warm and patient, and she curled around it whenever the soldiers came close. They never searched her, apparently A half-dead wolf shifter did not warrant inspection. The capital of Sindrath was carved into the side of a volcano. Buildings rose in tiers along the mountain's flank, connected by bridges and stairways cut from the dark stone. Steam vented from cracks in the rock. Everything radiated heat like a living thing. Revna had grown up in cold forests and stone packhouses, and this place felt like another world entirely. A world built for creatures who carried fire in their blood and carved their homes from the bones of the earth. They took her to the palace, a fortress embedded in the mountain's throat. Through corridors of polished obsidian, past guards in black scale armor, down, then up, then down again, until she had lost all sense of direction. The throne room was vast, vaulted ceilings vanishing into shadow, walls lined with unfamiliar weapons, the twin iron braziers she would later watch extinguish themselves, and the throne itself, a brutal slab of dark stone with no cushion, no ornamentation. That was where she first saw Casimir. He was already seated, reading a report, ignoring her arrival. She had expected a monster. The stories painted him as more beast than man, a creature whose wrath had leveled fortresses and whose name was used to frighten children into obedience. He did not look like a monster. He looked tired, deep, carved-in exhaustion that she recognized and immediately refused to think about. There were shadows beneath his eyes that spoke of nights spent fighting sleep rather than surrendering to it, and a stillness about him that felt less like calm and more like a man holding himself together through sheer force of will. His features were sharp and angular, almost severe, with dark brows drawn low over eyes that reflected the firelight like molten metal. His skin was a deep, warm brown, with faint scaling along his jaw that caught the light when he moved. Scars tracked across his forearms and disappeared beneath his sleeves. "A wolf," the patrol captain announced, shoving Revna forward. Her knees hit stone hard enough to make her eyes water. Casimir looked up. That was when the egg woke up and ruined everything. The hum started low and radiated outward. She felt it pulse once, twice, 3 times, each beat stronger than the last. Heat bloomed against her ribs, not painful but overwhelming, like a second heart had started beating inside her. Casimir went rigid. His eyes widened. The report slipped from his fingers. The brazier flames died simultaneously, as if pinched out. The throne room plunged into dimness, broken only by the ambient glow of volcanic stone and the faint copper light now visible through Revna's cloak, pulsing in time with the egg's hum. She watched, frozen, as the Dragon King rose from his throne, crossed the distance in 4 long strides, and dropped to one knee in front of her. The rest she had already lived through. The staring, the silver-haired man. Casimir's fractured voice asking where she had found the egg, and Revna lying badly about not having stolen it. What happened next was worse. Casimir ordered the throne room cleared. The silver-haired man, who she would later learn was called Osric, hesitated at the door. "My king, perhaps I should stay." "Out," Casimir said without looking at him. The doors closed with a sound like a tomb sealing shut. She was alone with the Dragon King. "Show me," he said. Her hands shook as she unclasped her cloak. The egg sat in its linen wrap, the copper veins glowing faintly like embers buried in ash. Casimir stared at it. His throat worked. "Do you know what you are carrying?" he asked. "An egg," Revna said, which earned her a look that suggested he was reassessing her intelligence. "That is a firstborn egg. The last one. It was taken from Sindrath before I was crowned. Every dragon in this realm has been searching for it for 3 decades. He paused. "And it is bonded to you. I can feel it. The egg has chosen a wolf." "Is that bad?" she asked. He let out a breath that was almost a laugh, but there was no humor in it. Just exhaustion and grief. It means you cannot leave. If you take that egg beyond the borders of Sindrath, it will die. And if it dies... His face went bare, stripped of authority and power. The last fire goes out. Revna stood in the empty throne room, an orphan with no pack and no name, holding the last hope of an entire civilization against her heart, and thought, I just wanted to wash linens. They gave her a room adjacent to the king's chambers, which was either a tremendous honor or an elaborate form of imprisonment. Revna could not decide which. The room was beautiful. Dark stone walls softened by woven tapestries in deep reds and burnished copper. A bed piled with furs so thick she nearly disappeared into them. A window overlooking the tiered city and the smoldering caldera beyond. It was also connected to Casimir's quarters by a door that did not lock from her side. For the egg's benefit, Osric explained. The firstborn requires proximity to the king's bloodline. You carry the egg, the king carries the blood. Therefore, proximity. Revna stared at the unlocked door. How much proximity are we talking about? Osric's left eyebrow moved approximately 1/4 of an inch upward. The egg will tell you, he said, which was spectacularly unhelpful. The first few days were excruciating. Revna spent them alone, sitting on her enormous bed with the egg cradled in her lap, afraid to touch anything, afraid to leave the room, afraid to breathe too loudly in case someone remembered she was a wolf in a dragon's den and decided to do something about it. The egg hummed. It hummed when she held it, louder when she was near the connecting door and softer when she moved toward the window. She had become a living compass, and the egg was pointing her toward the Dragon King whether she wanted it to or not. The last time she had been drawn toward a king, she had ended up sobbing on a borderland trail with a broken moon seal and a stolen egg. She was not interested in repeating the experience with a different species and a higher likelihood of being burned alive. Casimir, for his part, seemed equally determined to avoid her. She heard him through the connecting door, his footsteps heavy and measured, the low murmur of his voice as he spoke with Osric. But he never came through. He never summoned her. On the 4th day, a healer arrived. Her name was Dagny, a compact woman with weathered brown skin, sharp dark eyes, and hands that smelled of brimstone and dried sage. She examined the egg first, then Revna. You are malnourished, Dagny announced. Dehydrated. Your wolf is suppressed, and your bond center is damaged. Revna flinched. My what? Your bond center. Here. Dagny tapped the hollow of Revna's throat. Where a mating bond anchors. Yours has been recently severed. Rejected, I would guess, given the scarring. Revna looked away. It was never a real bond. He did not accept it. Dagny gave her a long, assessing look. The moon does not make mistakes, child. But kings certainly do. On the 5th day, she was summoned to the council chamber. 8 advisors sat around an oval table, and Casimir occupied the head, his posture rigid, his gaze fixed on a map. Revna was directed to a chair along the wall. Not at the table. She was an observer, which was fine. She had no desire to participate in dragon politics. She had enough problems. But the egg had other ideas. The moment she sat down, the copper veins glowed brighter through the linen wrap. Across the room, Casimir's hand paused over the map. His jaw tightened. He could feel it too. Whatever the egg was broadcasting, he was receiving it. She watched him work. Precise and decisive, cutting through arguments with a few words. But she noticed what the advisors missed. The way he pressed 2 fingers against his temple when he thought no one was looking, the slight tremor in his writing hand. The way he occasionally paused and stared at a point on the wall like he was seeing something far away and terrible. And the fact that his skin seemed cooler than it had 5 days ago, a subtle change that no one else was close enough to register, but that Revna could feel across the room like a shift in temperature. His fire was dying. Dagny had mentioned it almost casually. The king's fire has been fading for some time. The egg's return is not a moment too soon. After the meeting, Casimir remained at the table. He did not dismiss her either. The pause stretched. "You were staring," he said. Revna's face went hot. "I was observing. There is a difference." "Is there?" His tone was flat, but the corner of his mouth did a thing that was not quite a frown and not quite anything else. "You press your fingers against your temple when the pain gets bad. Your right hand has a tremor you are trying to hide, and you are colder than you were 5 days ago." Casimir turned to look at her fully. Those gold eyes, unreadable, fixed on her face with an intensity that made her want to look away. She held his gaze. "Dagny has a loose tongue," he said. "Dagny said nothing specific. I have eyes." He stood and crossed the room toward her. Stopped in front of her chair and looked down at the egg. "It is louder when you are near me," he said quietly. "The hum. I can hear it even through walls, but when you are in the room, it is deafening." He paused. "It sounds like a heartbeat." A crack in the stone of his expression, and then it was gone. He turned and walked out without another word. That night she listened to the sounds through the connecting door. Casimir pacing, the occasional sharp exhale of someone swallowing pain. At one point, a crash of glass or ceramic, followed by a silence that made her skin prickle. Then his voice, low and rough, muttering words in the old dragon tongue that she could not understand but whose tone she recognized. It was the sound of a man arguing with himself and losing. She pressed her hand against the door and felt heat radiating through the wood. Then the heat flickered and went cold. The egg pulsed once, urgent, insistent. Revna pressed her forehead against the door. She could feel him on the other side, not just hear him, feel him, a presence that tugged at a place behind her sternum, deeper than instinct, deeper than the broken bond Soren had left behind. "Do not do this," she whispered to herself. "Do not do this again." The egg hummed louder, and through the door his breathing finally slowed. She stayed pressed against the wood until she was sure he was sleeping, and only then did she crawl back to bed with the egg cradled against her heart and her chest aching with a feeling she refused to name. A routine formed over the following weeks, fragile and strange and charged with everything neither of them acknowledged. Mornings, Revna ate the absurd quantity of food the kitchen sent up. Midday, she sat in the council chamber with the egg while Casimir worked. Evenings, she returned to her room and listened to the Dragon King pace on the other side of a door that neither of them opened. The egg grew louder. The hum deepened, gained texture, became almost musical. When Casimir entered a room, the copper veins flared bright enough to see through her clothing. When he left, they dimmed. When he stood close, the egg practically vibrated. When he was far away, it went still and cold, and Revna felt its absence like a draft. It was during a council session on the 11th day that things shifted. An advisor was presenting trade figures when Casimir's pen slipped from his fingers and clattered to the table. His eyes went unfocused. The blue-white flame in the council fireplace guttered and shrank to a flicker. Osric moved first, stepping behind the king's chair to block the advisor's view. But Revna had already seen. Casimir's skin had gone gray. The scaling along his jaw looked dull and papery. His hands were shaking. The egg surged, not humming, screaming, a high, desperate vibration that rattled her teeth. Revna stood without thinking. She crossed the room, ignoring the startled looks, and placed her hand on Casimir's shoulder. Heat erupted beneath her palm, like she had struck a match against his skin. Color flooded back into his face. The scaling brightened. The fireplace roared back to full strength. Casimir gasped. His hand closed around her wrist, tight and reflexive, and for 3 seconds they stayed like that, her hand on his shoulder, his fingers locked around her wrist, the egg blazing copper between them. Then he realized where they were. He released her and straightened, jaw tight. "Thank you. That will be all." After the meeting, he found her in the corridor, walked beside her in silence for a long moment, his stride slow enough that she could keep pace. "That should not have happened," he said. "The part where you almost collapsed, or the part where I helped?" His jaw worked. "Both." "You are welcome, by the way." The look he gave her was frustrated and grateful and something deeper than either. "You should not have to touch me to keep me functioning. That is not why you are here." "Why am I here?" The question came out soft and unguarded and far too honest. Casimir stopped walking. In the dim corridor, his expression shifted to a warmth she had never seen before. "For the egg," he said, but his voice faltered on the word, and they both heard it. That night, the connecting door opened for the first time. Revna sat up, heart hammering, and watched Casimir's silhouette fill the doorway. He stood on the threshold, one hand braced against the frame. "The fire went out," he said. His voice was stripped bare. No authority, no command. Just a man standing in a doorway, admitting a thing that terrified him. "In my chambers, the hearth fire. It has never gone out before." "Come in," she said. He hesitated. She watched the war play out across his face, pride against need, the king against the man. Then he crossed the threshold and sat on the edge of her bed, his weight making the frame creak. He was close enough that she could feel the heat of him, diminished but still there. The egg blazed between them, the veins glowing so brightly the room looked dipped in amber. "How long have you been losing it?" she asked. "The fire." 3 years. Flames that would not answer when I called them. Heat draining from my skin at night. My dragon form growing harder to hold." He paused. "Dagny says I have months. Maybe less." "But the egg," Revna started. "The egg is not enough on its own. It needs a bond. A true bond between bearer and bloodline. Without that, it is just warmth. Beautiful, but not enough to reignite what I have lost." He looked at her, and the vulnerability in his expression made her chest ache. "You reignited it today, when you touched me. I felt it, just for a moment. The real fire, the one I have not felt in years." He swallowed. "How?" "I do not know." Eventually, his breathing deepened. His head dipped forward, caught itself, dipped again. "You can sleep here," Revna said, and then immediately wanted to take it back, because her face was on fire, and that was not what she meant. Except it was exactly what she meant, because the egg was humming, and his fire was dying, and she could not stand the thought of him going back to a cold room alone. He lay back against the furs, still on top of the covers, his boots still on, and closed his eyes. His body remained rigid for a long time, every muscle locked against the vulnerability of sleep, as if letting go was a skill he had forgotten how to perform. He was asleep in minutes. Revna watched the color return to his skin, watched the scaling along his jaw shimmer back to life. His face changed as sleep took him. The hard lines softened. The tension around his mouth released. He looked younger and sadder, and startlingly human beneath the scales and the crown and the weight of a dying bloodline. She pressed her palm flat against his chest. Beneath her hand, heat bloomed, a slow warmth spreading outward from his heart. The egg pulsed in time with it, and a place behind Revna's sternum pulsed too, and she thought, "Oh no." Osric cornered her the next morning. "The king slept for 6 hours last night," he said without preamble. "He has not managed 6 consecutive hours in over a year." They walked through corridors she had never seen, past armories and training yards. "I need to understand what is happening between you and my king," Osric continued. "The egg responds to you, his fire responds to you, and now he is sleeping in your quarters." "He slept on top of the covers," Revna said, with his boots on. Osric gave her a look that suggested the boots were not the point. They reached a balcony overlooking the caldera. There is an old word for it, he said. Ashkara, a fire bond, the dragon equivalent of what wolves call a moon seal. Revna's blood went cold. No, she said. Absolutely not. I already have a moon seal, she continued, her voice rising. A broken, rejected, humiliating moon seal from a wolf king who laughed at me. I am not doing this again with a different species and a different king and a different sacred bond that will end with me getting my heart torn out. The Ashkara is not the moon seal, Osric said calmly. It cannot be faked, and it cannot be rejected. It forms between a dragon and their true counterpart, and once it locks, it is permanent. Has it locked? Not yet, but it is forming. The egg is the catalyst. Your proximity to the king is accelerating it. Revna pressed her hands against the hot stone railing and tried to breathe. She had fled one bond only to stumble into another, and this one came with a dragon, an ancient egg, and no option of walking away. The next 2 weeks were a slow, exquisite unraveling. They began sleeping in the same room every night, not by design, by necessity. The egg grew distressed when they were apart, its hum turning sharp and erratic. And Casimir's fire, newly stabilized by her presence, would gutter the moment she left. Casimir began to talk. Not much, not easily. But with the egg glowing softly between them, he offered small pieces of himself. How he had been crowned at 19 after his father's death. How the weight of the Ember Throne had nearly broken him. How he missed flying. How the sky felt different when you had wings. How the world looked small and manageable from above, in a way it never did from the ground. Revna listened, and in exchange, she told him about Thornwall, about growing up as the packhouse orphan, about washing linens until her hands cracked, about the night the moon seal appeared, and the 3 days of foolish hope that followed. She told him about Mistress Hale, who ran the packhouse kitchens and always saved Revna the end piece of bread because she knew it was her favorite. She told him about the time she fell through the frozen creek as a child, and no one came looking for her for 2 hours because no one noticed she was gone. She never told him about Soren's laugh. She could not make herself say those words out loud, but one night, Casimir turned his head on the pillow and studied her in the ember light. The wolf king who rejected you. What was his name? Her throat tightened. Soren. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, with a conviction so absolute it left no room for doubt, he is a fool. 3 words, spoken without anger, without performance, without any interest in impressing her. Just a statement of fact delivered with the same certainty he used to issue royal decrees. As if Soren's rejection of her was not a matter of opinion, but a fundamental error in judgment, as obvious and undeniable as fire being hot. Her eyes stung. She turned her face away, but she felt his hand find hers, his fingers lacing through hers, and the egg blazed so bright it painted the ceiling copper. The warmth of his hand, the steadiness of his voice. The way he looked at her like she had never been invisible. Like the very idea of overlooking her was incomprehensible to him. She was falling. And this time it would destroy her, because this time it was real. The next morning she woke to find Casimir watching her sleep. He looked away immediately, but not before she caught the expression on his face, tender and terrified in equal measure. "Your fire," she said, sitting up. "Is it stronger?" He held up his hand. A small flame danced across his palm, steady and bright. "You did this," he said. "The egg did this," Revna corrected. "No." He closed his fist around the flame. "You." She stared at him, her heart beating so hard it hurt. He looked at her mouth, then away, then back. And then Osric walked in without knocking. "The council has concerns About the wolf in the king's quarters. The moment shattered. Casimir's face closed like a door slamming shut. He stood, became the king again in the space of a breath, and followed Osric out without looking back. Revna sat in the empty room with the egg dimming in her arms and a cold feeling spreading through her chest. She had seen this before. The moment a king decided she was inconvenient. That evening, Casimir did not come. She waited, the egg growing colder with every passing hour, until the hum turned into a sound she could only describe as a whimper. The next morning, Osric delivered the message. The king has determined that your proximity is no longer necessary. Arrangements have been made for separate quarters in the eastern wing. Did he say why? The council believes your presence is inappropriate and politically destabilizing. The king agrees. He did not agree. Revna could see it in Osric's eyes, in the muscle ticking in his jaw. The council had forced this, and Casimir had allowed it, and the result was the same. She was being sent away. Again. The egg went dark within hours. The veins faded to dull brown. The hum stopped entirely, replaced by a silence that felt like grief. By the second day, Revna stopped eating. By the third, the tremor started. By the fourth, she could not stand without the walls tilting sideways. Dagny found her on the fifth day, curled around the silent egg on a cold bed, shaking. "You stubborn child," Dagny murmured. "Your bond center is collapsing." "There is no bond. He sent me away." "The Ashkara does not care what the king decided," Dagny said sharply. "It is forming whether he allows it or not, and separating you is killing you both." "Both?" Dagny's expression was grim. "His fire went out last night. He collapsed during a meeting. Osric carried him to his chambers. He has not woken since." Revna tried to stand and fell. Dagny caught her. "Listen carefully," the healer said. "The Ashkara is not fully formed. It can still be severed. If I sever it now, you will survive. You will lose the bond to the egg, and you will need to leave Sindrath, but you will live." "And Casimir?" Dagny's silence was answer enough. "If the Ashkara completes, your fates become one. His fire becomes yours. His death becomes yours. There is no undoing it." "You are asking me to choose," Revna said. "I am asking you to save yourself. You do not owe him your life. You do not owe anyone your life. You are more than what you can give to others." The words hit deep. She had spent her entire life making herself useful because she believed it was the only way to earn her place. Washing linens, carrying eggs, being the vessel, the catalyst, the convenient tool. Never the person. Never the point. Dagny was offering her a way out. A chance to choose herself. She looked down at the dark, silent egg. She thought about Soren's laugh and the sound it had made when it broke her open. Then she thought about Casimir's hand finding hers, the way his voice sounded when he said, "You." The flame dancing on his palm and the look in his eyes like he had found a thing he thought was gone forever. "Take me to him," Revna said. Dagny searched her face for a long moment. Then she nodded. They half carried, half dragged each other through the corridors. The palace felt wrong. The ambient warmth that had radiated from the volcanic stone since her arrival was fading. The walls were cooling. Guards stood at their posts with their breath misting in front of their faces, a thing that should have been impossible inside a volcano. The king's fire was connected to the mountain itself. Without it, Sindrath was just stone. Osric met them at Casimir's door. His composure was cracking. She could see it in the tight line of his mouth, in the way his hands clenched at his sides. He has not woken in 14 hours. His skin is cold. His heartbeat is slowing. "Let me in," Revna said. The doors opened and the cold hit her like a wall. Casimir's chambers were frigid. The great hearth was black and dead. Frost crawled along the edges of the window. He lay in the center of his bed, utterly still, his skin ashen gray, the scaling along his jaw cracked and flaking. The enormous furnace-hot presence that had filled every room he entered was gone, and what remained was a man curling inward, growing smaller, letting go. Revna climbed onto the bed and pressed the egg against his chest, directly over his heart, and laid her hand on top of it. Nothing happened. The egg stayed dark. His skin stayed cold. She could feel the faintest flutter of his heartbeat beneath her palm, slow and irregular, fading like a candle guttering in its own wax. "Please," she whispered, "please do not do this." She could feel the Ashkara straining between them like a thread pulled too tight, fragile, one breath from snapping. "I know what you are doing," she said, her voice breaking. "I know you think you deserve this. I know you think the fire should die with you. But you are wrong." She pressed closer, wrapping herself around him and the egg both. "You are wrong because your fire kept me alive. This egg, your egg. It found me on the worst night of my life, and its warmth was the only reason I survived the crossing. Your fire saved me before I ever set foot in this kingdom." Her tears fell against his cold skin. "And I am done being left behind. I am done being the one people throw away. I am choosing to stay, and you do not get to die before I finish telling you that." The egg flickered. A single copper vein lit up like a thread being pulled through the dark. Then another. And another. The hum returned, faint as a whisper, and Revna sobbed with relief. She pressed her hand harder against the egg, against his chest, and felt the bond catch like a spark in dry kindling. His fingers closed around her wrist, weak but deliberate. "Revna," he breathed. Her name in his mouth sounded like a prayer. "I am here. I am here. And I am not leaving." His eyes opened, bright and burning, brighter than she had ever seen them, and fixed on her face. "The council," he started. "I do not care about the council. Do you?" He stared at her for one long, suspended moment. Then he pulled her down and kissed her. It was desperate and aching and tasted like salt and ash, and the moment their lips met, the Ashkara locked into place with a sound like a bell struck deep underground. She felt it reverberate through her body, through the egg, through the stone floor, and down into the heart of the mountain. The hearth erupted. Blue-white flames roared up the chimney. Frost evaporated. Heat flooded the room, the corridor, the entire wing. Casimir's skin blazed beneath her hands, the scaling brightening to deep iridescent bronze. The tremor was gone. The gray was gone. He was burning. Alive. Present in a way he had not been since the moment she met him. The egg between them split open. Not violently. It opened like a flower, the dark exterior peeling back in soft, curving segments to reveal a creature nestled inside, glowing with a light so pure it hurt to look at directly. Warmth poured from the opening, not the hostile heat of dragon fire, but a gentle, living warmth, the warmth of hearth fires and held hands and sunlight on closed eyelids. A heartbeat, small and fierce and new. The tiny creature blinked up at them from the shattered shell, its copper-veined wings still damp, its eyes an exact mirror of the king's. "Oh," Revna whispered. The hatchling opened its mouth and made a sound that was half chirp, half ember, then crawled up Revna's arm and curled against her neck like it had always belonged there. Casimir stared at the hatchling, then at Revna, then at the hatchling again. She watched his throat work, watched his hands open and close at his sides, watched 3 decades of grief and longing, and the terrible fear that the dragon line would end with him crack apart and dissolve into wonder. "She chose you," he said, his voice raw. "Firstborn always bond to their mother." The word settled over Revna like a crown she had never asked for. Mother. Then the hatchling sneezed, and a spark caught the edge of the pillow, and the next 40 seconds were chaos. But even while beating out the small fire with a fur throw, Revna was laughing, and Casimir was laughing, and the Ashkara hummed between them like a song that had finally found its words. The fire came back, but it was not whole. Revna felt it in the days that followed. The Ashkara hummed between them, warm and constant, but beneath it ran a current of unease that surfaced in Casimir's face when he thought she was not looking, in the way his flames flickered at unpredictable moments, in the nightmares she could feel through the bond like distant thunder. He would not speak of it. She asked twice. Both times he changed the subject with a smoothness that told her he had been deflecting these questions for years. The hatchling, whom Revna had named Ember because the creature was approximately 90% spark and 10% chaos, seemed to sense it too. She would climb down from Revna's shoulder and press herself against Casimir's chest, chirping with increasing urgency, as if trying to warm a place that kept going cold. It was Dagny who finally said it plainly. The Ashkara stabilized his fire, but it did not cure the source of the decay. A wound the bond cannot reach because he will not let it. What kind of wound? The kind he carries on purpose, the kind he thinks he deserves. That night, Revna woke to cold. Sudden and absolute, like the temperature had been halved between one heartbeat and the next. Beside her, Casimir was rigid, his hands clenched in the furs, his breathing shallow and ragged. She reached for him through the Ashkara and felt it. A pull, deep and insistent, dragging her down into a vast darkness. She closed her eyes and let the bond take her. When she opened them, she was standing in ash. It covered everything. A landscape of gray and black stretching to a horizon she could not see. The remains of buildings rose like broken teeth from the ground. Trees stood as charcoal pillars, their branches frozen mid-collapse. The air tasted of soot and silence. This was his inner world, the place his fire went to die. She found him at the center, standing before the ruins of a village, every structure burned to its foundation. The ash was ankle-deep, and it crunched beneath her feet with a sound like crushed bone. "Casimir," she said. He did not turn. He was staring at the ruins with the fixed expression she imagined he had worn every night for 3 years while the world slept, and he came here alone. Figures emerged from the ash. They rose like smoke, solidifying into forms that were terrible in their ordinariness. Villagers, farmers, children, a woman carrying an infant. All of them gray, all of them watching the Dragon King with eyes that held no accusation, only patience. And in the center, a girl, small, no more than 12, marked by fire, her clothes singed and torn. She held a clay figure of a dragon in her hands, the kind a child would make. She was looking at Casimir with quiet, devastating trust that had been betrayed. "Neshka," Casimir whispered. The Ashkara flooded Revna with his memory. A border conflict, a rival clan threatening his newly inherited throne, the battle that followed, and the moment his fire, young and barely controlled, broke free and swept through the village beyond the battlefield. He had been 20 years old. He had watched the flames consume everything, screaming for them to stop, unable to pull them back. 43 dead, Neshka among them. She had come running toward the flames, not away, because she loved dragons. Because she believed the Dragon King would never hurt her. "I killed them," Casimir said, his voice hollow. "My fire, my failure." Revna understood. His fire was not dying from a curse. It was dying from a choice. Casimir had decided that a fire capable of this destruction did not deserve to exist. He was extinguishing himself one ember at a time because he believed the world was safer without him burning. "You think your fire is only destruction," she said, stepping closer. "It is. Everything I have ever burned is here. Every life my fire has taken. I see them every night." Revna knelt beside him. She thought about Soren's laugh. She thought about the pack house steps. She thought about every morning she had woken up believing she was defective, that love was for other people. I spent my whole life believing I was left behind because I was wrong, she said. That the moon seal was a mistake, just like Soren said. Her voice cracked. And I carried that lie so long it became the truth. She reached for his hand. He let her take it. But it was never true. I was never a mistake. And your fire is not only what it destroys. She squeezed his hand. Your fire is the egg that kept me alive when I had nothing. Your fire is the mountain that shelters an entire kingdom. Your fire is Ember, sleeping against my neck, trusting me because your bloodline gave her life. The ash figures watched. Neshka watched. You cannot undo what happened, and you should not forget. But you are allowed to live with it. You are allowed to carry the memory and still burn. Casimir's hand tightened around hers. She felt it through the ashkara, a shift, tectonic and slow, like a wall coming down from the inside. I am sorry, he said to the figures in the ash. Not a plea, just the truth, delivered with nothing held back. I am sorry I could not control it. I am sorry I was not enough to save you. I will carry you with me for the rest of my life. His voice broke. But I cannot stay here with you anymore. Neshka looked at him. Slowly, she held out the clay dragon. Casimir reached for it with shaking hands. The girl smiled, small and sad and forgiving. Then she dissolved, and the others followed. One by one, like embers lifting from a dying fire, rising upward into a sky that was no longer gray, but faintly, impossibly, beginning to glow. Revna caught him when he fell. She held him as the ash warmed beneath them, as light cracked through the dead horizon, as the ruined village began to fade. I have you, she said against his hair. I have you. They woke together, tangled in furs and each other, with Ember chirping indignantly between them because she had been squished. The room was warm. The hearth burned steady and bright. And on the pillow between their heads sat a small clay dragon that had not been there before. Casimir picked it up and held it carefully, like it was the most precious thing in the world. Then he looked at Revna, and his expression was so raw, so open, so full of a joy so vast and terrifying it looked like pain that she could not breathe. Stay, he said. Not a command this time, a question. Always, she replied. The healing was not a single moment. It was 1,000 small ones, strung together like beads on a thread. Some mornings Casimir woke gasping. Revna was always there. She held his hand and waited until his breathing steadied, until the fire stopped flickering, until Ember settled back to sleep between them. He kept the clay dragon on the mantel above their bed. He never hid it. He never explained it. The court's reaction to a wolf as their queen was precisely as complicated as expected. There were whispers and objections, and one memorable council session where an advisor suggested the ashkara might be reversible, and Casimir's response involved flames, a very long silence, and the advisor's immediate resignation. Revna grew into the role the way she grew into everything, quietly, stubbornly, and with more grace than she gave herself credit for. She established a healer's guild in the lower tiers. She learned to speak the dragon tongue badly enough that Osric winced every time she tried. She raised Ember, who grew from a palm-sized spark to a creature the size of a large cat with an unfortunate fondness for setting tapestries on fire. On a cool evening, months after the ashkara had sealed, Revna stood on the balcony overlooking the caldera and felt Casimir's arms wrap around her from behind. His chin rested on the top of her head. Ember dozed on the railing, copper wings glinting in the last light. The moon seal, Casimir murmured. The one that went dark. Does it still trouble you? Revna looked down at her left wrist. The silver crescent had faded to a faint scar. In its place, Winding up her forearm in delicate copper lines was the Ashkara mark, glowing softly in time with Casimir's heartbeat. "No," she said. "It led me here." She leaned back against his chest and closed her eyes. Below them, the mountain hummed with fire, steady and alive, and above them the sky was full of stars, and between them the bond burned on.